Hey everyone, my name is Lauren Sanders. I'm Director of Content here at BizEquity, and I'm very excited to introduce you to our two special guests today. Michael Carter is the CEO and founder of BizEquity, and he's here with his longtime friend, a story you'll hear in just a minute, Daniel Crosby, the Chief Behavioral Officer at Orion Advisor Solutions. So I'm gonna hand it over to Mike and Daniel to get us started.
Thank you, Lauren, very much, and thanks, Gwen, and the team at BizEquity that really helped put all this together. It's super fun and a privilege for me to be on with my good friend Daniel, and we decided to run this more like one of his podcasts. So it's really just a conversation that we're going to have together, two folks that love the industry and two folks that are friends. But before we kick that, the part of the show off in terms of the substance of the actual webinar or the event, but I wanted to introduce Daniel. So Daniel, as Lauren can attest to, coming from Orion before, Daniel's one of the nicest guys in the industry and one of the smartest. He's written 3 best-selling books in this concept, which is now and this topic, which is totally super topical and very popular right now around behavioral finance. He's kind of the guru of behavioral finance globally, and he's written 3 best-selling books. 2, the Laws of Wealth, and the one called The Behavioral Investor. I love The Laws of Wealth. That was the first one I read, Dan. But can you tell the audience how you got started in, this whole kind of wealth tech space, and specifically, because it's such an interesting topic and you've been doing it for so long, behavioral finance?
Yeah, absolutely. Great to be here with you today, Mike. It's always a pleasure. So I grew up the son of a financial advisor. So I think unlike a lot of Americans, I was at a very young age talking about stock picking and investing from a very early age, and was always super proud of the work that my dad did. He brought home great stories about the people he was helping. And I thought I got a really great business education at a young age. But as a young man, I really fell in love with psychology. My first year at college, took some GE courses in psychology, absolutely fell in love. Served a 2-year mission for my church in the Philippines, where I was, of course, learning about new people and new cultures and new ways of moving through the world, and just really fell in love with people science and the study of people. So sort of dedicated my life to that, but long story short, about halfway through my PhD program in clinical psychology, I just kind of burned out. I, was meeting with a couple thousand clients a year, 40 or 50 hours a week of just talking to people having the worst week of their life. And it's important work, it's work that I believe in, but I think it's work that I wasn't perhaps necessarily cut out for. And so I came to my dad and said, look, Dad, I love thinking deeply about why people do the things that they do, but I don't know that I need to do it in a medical setting. And he said, well, there's a ton of psychology in my work. And at the time I was like, well, what are you talking about? I was 23 years old and really just considered my dad sort of a numbers guy and perhaps a salesperson, but never sort of an armchair psychologist, and didn't really understand it. And my dad really didn't have the language at the time to say, hey, go look into behavioral economics or behavioral finance. He just knew that there was a lot of psychology in the way that his clients reacted. So that, sort of offhanded statement by my dad sent me down this path where I discovered behavioral economics and sort of committed my life to being an intermediary between the ivory tower of academia, bright lights like Daniel Kahneman and Richard Thaler, who are winning Nobel Prizes for their work. I wanted to take their great work and translate it to serve the needs of people like my dad. So that's been kind of where I've slotted into this industry, is I think applied behavioral finance, taking the science and making it work for everyday advisors and everyday folks.
No, it's awesome. And to see your career and how you've kind of gone from being kind of an independent thought leader in the space that wrote these best-selling books, that was a high-price consultant, right? Strategic advisor consultant all over the world, to now being part of the executive team at Orion and being their chief behavioral finance guru is awesome. So congrats on that.
Thank you.
I have to give credit to Edmund Walters, who's an amazing fintech entrepreneur, founder of eMoney, who put us together. Dan and I met at, Edmund decided to put together the kind of future of fintech 7 years ago event over Valentine's Day weekend. And so I flew from kind of cold and snowy Philadelphia by myself because we had two little ones, or one little one at that point, and was able to, I got my hotel key and I walked into Daniel's hotel room where I met his whole family, including his wife and Daniel. So that's how we first met. And then that began our friendship together. And I thought what Edmund did that day and that weekend, and I guess he continues to do now at InvestNet, was super cool because he brought together people that came from different aspects of kind of the wealth tech slash fintech value chain, and had everybody in a room to do kind of a hackathon of ideas. And that was the only agenda, and it was super cool. But I'm not sure if you remember that story, Daniel. I believe you do, I think.
How could I forget the strange man that walked into my living room?
Exactly. Very strange.
How
Totally.
could I forget?
Totally. So, you talked about how you kind of got into the behavioral finance space. And, as we talk about a lot, probably monthly, it's interesting to watch the last few years. It seems like this kind of first generation of wealth tech companies that have been created are kind of, capital W, as people say, lowercase t in other spaces, right? Meaning they're high on the wealth domain expertise, because a lot of people came from being wealth advisors that thought like something could be done better, but low on the tech side. And if you think about it from the fintech space, and I specifically am thinking about folks on the API side, like Stripe, right, or others, they wanted to solve a technical problem, so kind of low on the F, right, and high on the T. Do you see that changing? Because I know you have a great lens being at Orion, and you guys see with your big platform that kind of help advisors be better advisors, which we're going to talk about, the advisor and the business owner journey and how that's evolving and what we're seeing in the future from an advisory perspective. But do you see that changing, Dan?
Yeah, I do see it changing, and I think the consumer expectations are ratcheting up in a big way. I mean, people, the wealth piece, the W piece, is sort of table stakes. Of course, you got to get the wealth portion right, but tech is getting so much better so fast that I think the expectations are always high, and they're growing. And so I think that you need to bring both of those forces together in the same way that a good behavioral economist has to sort of sit at the intersection of money and mind. You have to know about the world of psychology and the world of high finance. I think both things are necessary there. But am I allowed to ask you questions? This is a friendly.
Yeah, dude, shoot. Oh, yeah, absolutely. We're just going to keep this rolling.
Yeah, there's a concept in behavioral finance called meta knowledge, and a big piece of meta knowledge is knowing what you don't know. And I know that of the two of us on this call, I know a lot less about this than you do. So I'd be interested in your perspective about the W and the T and how they're changing.
Yeah, I totally think it's changing. I think there's some really amazing new technologies that's making it happen. I think that your topic, right, behavioral finance, is super interesting because I think it's going to totally change the advisor and the business owner relationship. I think there's this concept of, the advisor becoming more like a coach.
Yeah.
So when we started BizEquity, which we'll talk about, and I know you'll ask me about, and so on and so forth, maybe, I don't know, but you don't have to. But the whole idea was, how do you help business owners discover their true worth of their business that they've put years and years in, sacrificed, went without salary, right? All the things we both know. How do you help them make sure that they get a fair number for their business? And, now it's an overused term, but at the time, 10 years ago, 11 years ago, it wasn't. Democratize that knowledge for them, right? And so we never started, to be quite honest and totally authentic, we didn't start as a company focused around helping financial advisors do a better job, right? Or make more money. We focus around this mission to democratize business valuation knowledge. Now, what we discovered through good friends and in the industry, that and just kind of keeping your ear to the ground, was the best people that are talking to business owners at the critical time, that are coming at least from our perspective, kind of the highest ethical levels, are in the financial services space, believe it or not, and specifically wealth professionals, or RIAs, right? In this burgeoning category of RIAs. So I think this idea that they're moving to become more like coaches, and if they're becoming more like coaches, and this is my Easter egg for you, Daniel, because I said I had an Easter egg. I think this idea that, and you did this presentation a little while back, they're moving from this concept, which we'll make available to everybody. I'm not asking, but I wanted to show you the Easter egg, of this concept of financial wellness, which a lot of people are talking about, and InvestNet's done a great job kind of putting their pieces together of all the companies they've acquired. They hired a great chief marketing officer, Rich from Lincoln, and he's done a nice job around this idea of financial wellness. But what's really happening, kind of to your point, right, is this idea of personal wellness.
Yeah.
And for an advisor to do all these things and be the coach for somebody's life journey, Rich Cargard from Forbes, the publisher for many years, who's legendary, I was able to talk to him last week, and he always talks about everybody had in their life, there's a hero's journey that you're going to go on personally and professionally. And if you think about a financial advisor, in some ways, right, they're that coach that's going to help the business owner in our case, but anybody, right, go through their hero's journey, right, and be there. And you need technology to do it.
Yeah.
And one of the things we've done at BizEquity, we promoted two great people that have been here with me for a long time. One is Jason Early, and Jason's president of business operations, and the other person is Amir, and Amir was our CTO. So we promoted Amir to COO, and the idea of that is why? Because technology now is really core operations, and I think that's really happening on the financial advisory side. But they're able to pull piecemeal stovepipe type apps from companies like Orion together. So I do think that WealthTech by default is going to be capital W, capital T around it. So that's my riff on it.
Let's throw one more letter in there.
Yeah.
We've got the W, we've got the T. I think we got to throw the B in there as well for behavior, because the thing about technology is it has all sorts of huge impact on behavior that really operate beneath people's awareness. So if you think about Netflix, which I have watched way too much of over the last 2 years, they added in this button that's basically, watch next show, and it has the little timer where it sort of counts down to just like, I'm going to auto select you into watching the next show unless you physically take the remote and back out of it. And that one simple piece of technology has upped the time spent viewing Netflix content by 70%. So that one little piece of technology has had this dramatic shift in the way that people engage with that technology. And so one of the reasons why I work in WealthTech is because you talked about me being an independent consultant for so long. That's true. For about a decade, I was on my own, doing consulting, speaking, writing, and, making a nice living doing it. But my frustration was that it wasn't sort of baked in. I would go, I would give a speech, everyone would clap, everyone would read my book, and then they would summarily forget everything that I had told them and wouldn't incorporate it in. We know the research on forgetting says that we forget about 90% of what we learn in the first 3 days. And so even if advisors are trying to coach their clients and they're educating them and they're doing the right things, if it's not embedded within a platform, if it's not embedded within every piece of their business, it really just doesn't stick in the way that it ought to. So we started out heavy on the W. I think we're getting better at the T, and I think we need to integrate the behavior into the tech, and then we will have fully arrived.
Totally. And one of the things, let everybody in on what Dan and I talk about for the last few years is this idea of what Daniel just said. Well, so how? So coming at it from my side of the balance sheet, or where we sit at BizEquity, what we've been talking about or espousing for years, which is definitely going to happen, right? Hopefully in my lifetime, is this idea of personalized behavior-based portfolios. And we called it early on business owner portfolios, because if you think about it, business owners have different types of behavior than others. So entrepreneurs think differently than other people. And the idea that we had originally was this whole idea that based upon the industry that you're in, not just is your behavior different because you're an entrepreneur, right?
Mhm.
And a lot of great entrepreneurs, right, are dyslexic, maybe they're not that organized, so on and so forth, right? And they might have high risk tolerance in some ways, but in other ways, very low risk tolerance, right? I'm that way. Like, so I had high risk tolerance building BizEquity out, but I
Yeah.
have low risk tolerance, believe it or not, in
For
like
public
most of
markets.
everything,
Yeah.
everything else I do. So like, how's that's going to change? And imagine, if you think about it, and this was my view as a, entrepreneur dealing with wealth advisory or in this space as a consumer of it, is, what's balanced portfolio for me,
Mhm.
if 70% of the time or 95%, God knows, of your net worth is tied into your own company stock, right?
Yeah.
Owning the S&P 500 isn't necessarily a balanced strategy, because the S&P 500, right, is getting more and more tech heavy, and
Yeah.
BizEquity is basically a tech company, right?
Mhm.
A SaaS company. So that, at its most simplistic level, I think shows the power of how tech's going to change. And, this ability to have, as we'd also talk about, Dan, right, mass customized, personalized portfolios based upon where you are and where your hero's journey is going and where your life's journey is going, and for that coach to provide that.
Yeah.
And I think it runs kind of counterintuitive in some ways to the whole ETF movement that, classic advisors now, I think they give you a basket of ETFs that are diversified. But
Mhm.
you want to riff on that, because I know you have amazing thoughts on this. And to your point, I think behavioral finance is moving from like a cottage industry a bit,
Mhm.
and like, Dan, please speak to us, right? And tell us what's going on, to how do we put your brain, right, in our system and in our
Right.
process.
Yeah, I'm absolutely with you on deep personalization in terms of values, behavioral traits, meaning, personality, all of that being sort of where the industry is headed. And I think it's important on a couple of levels. One thing is, as I've researched the eternal question of can money buy happiness, the answer, it has to be said, is sort of, right? So I mean, there's a couple of ways in which money buys happiness. We know that at some level, everyone quotes the the $75,000 study from about 10 years ago, probably closer to 100 at this point. But you need some level of wealth to just cover the basics of living, and beneath that level, you're less happy. But what we also find is that people buy happiness by being charitable. People buy happiness by getting out of stuff they hate, getting someone to cut your lawn or clean your house if you hate those things. But most interestingly, we get happiness out of spending money in ways that align with our personality. So there's really a lot of work that we as tech providers can do to help people spend money more thoughtfully in ways that are really going to improve their lives. But perhaps most importantly, I think we have a lot of work to do in terms of direct indexing and other things being used to personalize the Mike Carter portfolio, the Daniel Crosby portfolio. So I ran numbers over the last 50 years. If you took $10,000 50 years ago and invested in, in a value fund and held that, you'd have $2.1 million today. Amazing. You put that in a growth fund, you'd have $1.7 million today. Amazing. The average investor, though, Mike, took that $10,000 and, depending on whose estimate of the behavior gap you believe, turned that into somewhere between 285,000 and 415,000. So we as an industry spend all this time fighting about, growth versus value, active versus passive, sort of the fees, all these eternal debates that we have. Meanwhile, the people we profess to serve are sort of languishing on the side because we haven't figured out a way to build portfolios that aren't mathematically optimal, but are rather behaviorally optimal. Portfolios that are so fitted to that person like a custom suit that they induce them to make the right moves, stay on the path, and see the long-term effects of compounding that wealth. So personalization and tech are the means by which that goes down.
Totally. And it's not just target retirement funds, right?
Nah.
Because that's what we, and one of the things you said one time, I think it was at a presentation with Brinker, which is now part of Orion, with our good friend Noreen, who we love, was this idea that, well, if you're going to have a portfolio, right, that's kind of a quantitative portfolio or an active portfolio, keep it active. If it's going to be an inactive portfolio, keep it inactive. But a lot of people kind of do both, right? And it's kind of misconstrued. And I would just say I think advisors have a great opportunity if they can help a business owner or entrepreneur. To your point about happiness, happiness is, as you said, right, spending based upon your behavior, but it's also kind of helping them on their hero's journey. And what can the advisor deliver to them to not just map their portfolio, as we talk about, I guess, but map their life's mission or their life's goal. So that was a fun one.
So I feel like I've talked a bit about the changing relationship. If you think back to your Psych 100 class and Maslow's hierarchy, the kind of clients that most advisors want to serve have the base of Maslow's pyramid covered. They have adequate safety, they have adequate shelter and food and all these things. So I think the role of an advisor moves upstream a bit, and we have to start talking about things like meaning and belonging and happiness and legacy and all these things, because it's not like, it's not like once you have money, all your problems go away. You just have sort of higher order, more philosophical, more psychological problems. And I see the role of advisors changing to reflect that. Where do you see BizEquity 10 years from now? How does the role of advisors as they interface with business owners change in light of this change that I'm talking about?
Yeah, totally. So a few years ago, and we did it, somewhat quietly, right? We took in a majority strategic partner with, Advanced Media / Advanced Publications and American City Business Journals, and now they're basically the owner of the owner of the business, BizEquity, and it was one of the best things we did because. And then I'll get to kind of where we're going in 10 years, but this was kind of the gas in the tank to get there, right? And the ability to be surrounded by the folks that we needed to be to get there. Advance is kind of a Berkshire Hathaway, but for data, tech, and a really interesting portfolio that's been put together, and amazing partners. And American City Business Journals is the most read. They've become really the local newspaper. So they're in 45 markets across the United States, and they're the most read of any business periodical, business magazine, business news, and I think even just local news, which this whole push when people are talking about local. Well, they've been doing it for 30 or 40 years, and they're doing it really well. So for us, it was number one, BizEquity was a great idea. We skated to where the puck was going. The fact that business owners and that whole entrepreneurial segment is a really important. Tiburon says over $13 trillion of wealth is going to transfer the next 10 years for advisors. Yeah. And advisors are now getting religion in terms of, business owners are important. I'm not just going to call on executives. Right. We should really talk about business owners. So we skated to where the puck was going with that, and we created this killer platform that enabled every company in the United States, India, Singapore, and the United Kingdom to be valued, literally. Or even a company doing $100,000 in revenue or $1 billion in revenue can now have the same kind of lingua franca in terms of the how that company can be valued and create a customized 29-page personalized business valuation report with 4 conclusions of value. Super cool. Life's work, business wise, best thing ever built. Totally awesome. But in order to get to where we want to go in 10 years, where BizEquity really becomes a noun, and that's what, Gwen, who runs marketing for us, this big kind of BizEquity Now campaign that we've been doing, which is what's your BizEquity? In order to do that, right, we need a gas in the tank, and we need a big bullhorn, and we needed kind of a great group of people around us to help us get there. And with American City Business Journals in 45 markets, and a lot of their main advertisers and big advertisers are all part of our financial services clients that license our product, right? Banks, wealth advisors, insurance companies, accountants, M&A advisors. It made a lot of sense. And the CEO of ACBJ, Whitney Shaw, is an amazing guy. So, that's why we did it. And where we see us going in the next 10 years is this idea that BizEquity does become a noun. And to your point about how's WealthTech going to be capital W and capital T, or FinTech, continue to be capital T, it's this idea that, I think what's going to change is today, if you go get a loan for a business loan, and you go for your old consulting company, say, not that you would ever gotten a business loan, but let's say you got a business loan, you went to Chase Bank. Chase would say, okay, Daniel, what's your current income and what's your credit score? It would be like getting a car, right? Let me guess, do you have a Tesla or no?
Me?
Yeah, no.
I have a Mercedes. I have a Mercedes. As the North American headquarters is here in Atlanta, so I have to support the.
Oh, I love it.
So,
so they would treat you like you were getting a car loan or a car lease, whatever, which is so crazy because the business gets no credit, right? So we think just like Equifax and FICO, they have the credit score. You're going to say, well, what's your BizEquity? So a bank's going to say, what's your BizEquity? The financial advisor that's running on top of the Orion platform is going to say, oh, click here, what's your BizEquity value? In order to do the patented Daniel Crosby behavioral finance indexing, we have to know what your business is worth because you're an entrepreneur to make sure that you're truly balanced. So from an insurance perspective, we have a really interesting company that we work with where, insurance is going to become based upon, right, the value of your shares. So it's automatically going to roll and be covered based upon the value of your life insurance policies. For instance, if you and I were in business together and we had a buy-sell agreement, it shouldn't just be based upon the point of time when we started it. It should run to the forever for the business so that it always catches up and it's always alive, right? So I think a lot of InsurTech, WealthTech, FinTech been focused on the simplistic kind of consumption layer, or the super technical in FinTech, the ability to connect APIs and have things talk. But eventually it's going to go full cycle, right? And enable new products to be created. And I know that's what you and I talk about a lot as friends and kind of colleagues in the industry. So with that said, name a few companies that you think are like super cool and that are doing it right in, the wealth tech space, because we both are in it. And we have a lot of relationships in that industry. Tell me what you like out there that you see.
Okay, so I'm gonna give a shout out to a couple of Utah companies. My in-laws live in Utah. I go out there every summer, and I am blown away by the wealth tech scene in Utah, which is, I think, a little bit off the grid for most folks. But they're building their own little silicon slopes there. There's a company called Divvy, which anytime a company solves a legitimate pain point, I'm in love. And there's no pain point in my life larger than having to do my monthly expense report and reimbursement. And Divvy streamlines that whole process, obviates the process in a lot of respects, and it's just clean. It's just clean. It solves a real problem. TaxBit is another one, crypto for basically crypto taxes, again, based out of Utah, doing incredible work to simplify the complex world of crypto taxes. I know a lot of my crypto friends are kind of pulling their hair out this month over that. And then the last one I'll talk about, I'm actually going to give a shout out to a bit of an old school firm. It's Havener Capital, and Stacy Havener is doing. It's not very tech heavy, but is doing such incredible work around helping financial advisors and boutique asset managers master the art of storytelling. You've talked about the hero's journey. For anyone who's not familiar with the literary idea of the hero's journey or the monomyth, if you haven't read Joseph Campbell, to sort of understand how people think about and narrate their own lives, I think what Stacy and the Havener Capital team have done is harness that deep understanding of the power of narrative and help put it in the hands of emerging managers to great effect. So now I'm excited. I want to hear yours. Who are you in love with these days?
Well, I'll go all over the board, and it's hard, but to your point, so in no order. So I'd just say, obviously, I think what you're doing at Orion is super cool, and what Eric has put together, having talent like you, and doing the Brinker deal with Noreen and Brendan, and the great founder of Brinker, and the way that advisors can now have kind of a turnkey, so that they don't have to make all the decisions around what's the best in class tech to consume.
Yeah.
And I'd also have to say, right, Envestnet's done a nice job. I think I was just with Farouk, the new chief data officer there. And I think they have some cool ideas in terms of how to utilize their data. And Bill Krager is just a great, solid guy. And Edmund is, probably one of the smartest guys in the fintech space, and brought us together. So I'll be eternally grateful for Edmund for that. So we'll get the two Goliaths and the behemoths out of the way, being Orion and Envestnet. And then the others, I would just say, hardest working man probably in fintech, Adam Holt with, I'm still a fan of the asset map process in terms of how clean it is and it's elegant. But I think he could build up a ton behind the scenes there from an API perspective and do some interesting things. So I think Adam does a really nice job. Morningstar, I think the brand of Morningstar in wealth management is going to get more and more and more and more prevalent. And I'm not talking about how the Morningstar competes with Orion and Envestnet and so on and so forth. I'm talking about more broadly, what they're known for in terms of data and research and integrity. And Kunal, the CEO, is amazing, and he has a mission orientation, which we'll talk about, right? In terms of kind of where he's going as an organization. So I think Morningstar is one to watch. Not that they need to be watched because they're so big, but they're super, super interesting. I've been blown away just watching Vestwell grow because they picked a niche, big niche, 401k, and they've done a great job with it. I think the CEO's done an amazing job attracting great talent. I think that's super cool. I have friends over at Convergency, and Convergency's doing kind of a think tank, and they have Frank Percelli, who used to be chairman of BlackRock Wealth, who's a great human being and a great person, and great thought leader, and Peter Ciesco, who's all the above, and that, and the rest of the team there, Dave and everyone else. I think they do a nice job. Bonsai, a really interesting kind of insurance consumption wealth advisor application, which is super cool, and a recent client. So that one I'm probably a little cute on, but I think they're going to do a lot of great things with Robert, the CEO there. And then one out of the way is a great entrepreneur on the West Coast created this platform called Vatom, V-A-T-O-M. And the founder is actually the co-founder of kind of, he's considered the father of the NFT. And so he was on our advisory board. He's been a good friend. He was my boss 22 years ago. And what they're building in terms of making this whole metaverse a reality, I think is going to be super, super cool. I was never a person that was like, oh, the metaverse, and probably because of anti kind of like the Facebook, like, oh, now they're called Meta, whatever. But not the anti-Facebook, but the idea that all of a sudden overnight the metaverse is just going to take over everything. But I do think every website, in the world in the next 10 years is going to have a come inside button.
Right.
My words or whatever, you click inside and you go inside. And that's probably the best way, I think, to describe the metaverse and what Vatom, V-A-T-O-M, is doing. And I say that not as a client, they're not a client, not a shareholder, anything like that. Just I think what they're doing is super cool. And now, you and I had a call about this a month or two ago, but where does that go with wealth management? Who knows? But clearly, I think there's going to be a role for the advisor working with clients or business owners and using the metaverse to do that, and kind of come inside to the advisor's website or web presence or social presence. I think there's a lot there that'll probably get uncovered in the next bunch of years, but it's always exciting, right? The next thing. So Web 3.0, regardless of what anybody thinks on this webinar about the concept of the metaverse, and I was that way too, but Web 3.0, is clearly here. If you think about Web 1.0, right, it was websites and Yahoo and Netscape Navigator and so on and so forth. And the Web 2.0 was social and content management, but really making it social. And then Web 3.0, I think, is, deep personalization, as you talked about. It's the ability to actually have provenance around your own data and information and security, and who you're going to trust in that. And I think the role of the advisor there is pretty interesting. So, I mean, I named a bunch of companies, I guess, but they're all companies that I kind of authentically feel good about.
So you've written this book, you've done the work around the mission core, right? So when someone asks you to talk about companies you're excited about or that you believe in, how central is that idea of a mission or doing right by shareholders and stakeholders? How centrally does that factor into your power rankings there?
Yeah, no, super cool. I think it does. And obviously with the Morningstar thought around it, obviously about why we did, also the deal with American City Business Journals in advance, right? There's a mission orientation to what they do as an organization.
Yeah.
And I also think like it's now just become good business. Like, there's a Harvard business professor that most recently, I think his first name's Ravi, but he most recently just did a book, and he was on CNBC recently, a couple months ago, wrote a book. And he said, if you would have told me, who was a wrote about investment books or whatever, investing. He said, if you would have told me I was going to write a book about purpose 10 years ago, I would have told you you're nuts. He said, but what I noticed was the companies that performed the best from a public market perspective, and I think outperformed by 17% over like a 5-year period, were companies with this deep and stated purpose beyond just profit. And so now I think it's just I think it's mainstream. But why I did the book was, so one of my former board members at BizEquity and a really good friend of mine, Michael Moe, we would get together and we both said it as, capitalists that were kind of moderate, certainly moderate, that like, well, what happened to kind of capitalism a little bit, right? It's kind of been hijacked. Another topic of yours, maybe for next time, around decision science orientated, financiers, in New York kind of hijacked this idea of the invisible hand, and it's kind of gone astray. And like for capitalism to really succeed, right, it has to, it shouldn't just be, oh, capitalism's bad, socialism's good. Well, socialism's 0 for 43 in the 43 countries that it's tried. Capitalism's the greatest economic system the world's ever known, but that doesn't mean that it can't get better.
Right.
And what we noticed was Adam Smith, right, who wrote The Wealth of Nations, another great author like yourself, Daniel. Before he wrote The Wealth of Nations, he wrote The Theory of Moral Sentiments.
Yes.
And he wrote it 10 years before The Wealth of Nations. So kind of what happened, to make it a simplistic argument that Mike and I were riffing on, is like people I think just got The Wealth of Nations, Invisible Hand is like a catchy thing. And it's like, oh yeah, it's just about pure profit. It's the invisible hand, let it roll. But before he did The Wealth of Nations, he wrote that book, The Theory of Moral Sentiments, which basically said you should have a foundation of kind of ethics and morality, which then capitalism will live in. And, BC Forbes, who created Forbes, that was his view of true conservatism, was back and doing well. So that was the whole kind of underlying basis of the Mission Corporation, was prior to the book from the Harvard business professor, was to show and prove through research that companies that had a deep level of purpose, like in BizEquity's case, it was to democratize business valuation, to help business owners get more for their business, for their families, and for their teams, and so on and so forth. That those companies outperformed, and it wasn't just being great human beings. It was about also having great business. And it came at a time with this whole tax hike idea around raising the capital gains taxation. And so kind of the idea that I had in terms of the book was, hey, let's do this framework, this blueprint. And Michael and I riffed on it and got it together during COVID. But oh, by the way, if you are a mission corporation, you should have the lowest capital gains rate, because you are doing well.
Right.
By doing good. And if you do these 7 declarations that we write about in the Mission Corporation, you should have the lowest tax rate. So it's like, a little of the idea that tax policy should be utilized to incentivize better behavior, not just quantify success.
Yeah, right.
And I think that's a moderate view. Like, I don't think that's like an extremist view. Like if
Right.
somebody's giving back and the company, has, 3% of employee time, 2% of net income, and 1% of revenues going to charities in their communities, right?
Hmm.
And they have a stated mission or purpose beyond just dollars and cents, and they do 5 other things that we list in the 7 declarations. I don't think anybody's going to begrudge them to pay a lower tax rate than a one-person hedge fund in New York City, right?
Right.
So that was, that's the idea of the Mission Corporation. And I do think going forward, right, I think that this idea is what ESG is to public markets,
Hmm.
becomes to private markets without being, whatever that's called, virtue waving or whatever. It's just going to be like, hey, you do well, you do good, you perform well, and government can incentivize that by lowering the taxes and let it rip and watch the economy boom. So I'm pretty passionate about that right now in terms of, philosophically and intellectually.
Yeah. I posted something to Twitter and LinkedIn about this a day or two ago. I'm reading this book called The Sweet Spot, which is about basically why we suffer for pleasure. Like it talks about stuff like training for a marathon, eating hot sauce, going from the going from the sauna to jump in a cold lake, like all these sorts of things that we do. But a big piece of it's about how we create meaning. And they interviewed people from all these different jobs. And like we think of some jobs as being inherently better than others, right? Like being a janitor, we think of as perhaps producing less happiness than being a dentist or a banker or something like that. But what they found was there's huge variability within every profession. And that even in a profession like janitorial work, there's some people that find it extremely meaningful if they tie it to something higher. They talked about interviewing this one janitor who was working, during the space race to clean the offices in Houston, and said, look, I helped put a man on the moon, like, because that
Totally.
person was able to tie it to something higher. So I think that I loved having you on my podcast to talk about these ideas, because I think there's a well-being element to Mission Core. I think there is a performance element to Mission Core, and I think it's a holistic good.
No, thank you, brother. What's the next book? Do you have any ideas? I'm sure you have ideas, but are you in the middle of a book? What's the next book?
So I wrote 3 books in 5 years and kind of burned myself out a bit. But what I've been working on really slowly is going to be kind of my life's work, I think, and it's actually about meaning.
Oh,
It's about how we create meaning, how we find purpose. How that purpose can drive us to higher levels of happiness and fulfillment. How it's different than happiness. How it can help with productivity. I feel like this book, I think it could literally take me 10 years to write. I'm just enjoying the process, taking it slow, and trying to spend 30 minutes to an hour a day thinking about how we imbue our lives with meaning.
that's awesome. I love that.
Yeah,
So with that said, my friend, we'll sign off, but I hope we do this again. I would love to do this maybe quarterly with you.
love it.
But really awesome to be able to. We were talking to Lauren and Gwen about doing this. They said, well, what do you want to use? What slides do you want to go through? And historically, I guess I'm a slide guy.
Yeah,
But I was like, no, we're just gonna talk like we normally talk, pretty much, outside of asking about the kids and the family.
right.
And then we just riff. And I thought that this is awesome and kind of truly authentic, no holds barred. Some of our best ideas, I think we shared, kind of.
Yeah,
I hope everybody in the audience, have something from this that they could utilize for their own practices or for their own businesses. And I know Daniel and I, try to make ourselves available. So if there's any questions or anything about Daniel, you want to give your email, I'll give mine. And I know that BizEquity side, Gwen and Lauren, we're going to do a lot of follow-ups in terms of the information from this session. But what's your email, Dan?
Yeah, it's just daniel.crosby@orion.com. And probably even easier than that is I'm very active on LinkedIn and Twitter, Daniel Crosby, PhD on LinkedIn, and at Daniel Crosby on Twitter.
Awesome. And I'm just M Carter, MCARTER at BizEquity.com. And on LinkedIn, I don't know, but I'm Michael M Carter maybe or something. But in Philadelphia suburbs. But great to be with you, Daniel. Thank you again to the BizEquity team for helping to produce this, and look forward to talking to you next week, not live.
Yeah. All right. Talk to you soon. Take care.
Yeah. Bye bye. Happy Easter.
Thank you. Happy Easter.
Thanks.